Hello and welcome everybody to our chat and learn today. I am Hunter. I am one of your hosts here at Power to Fly, and I'm so grateful to have you here. We're going to be jumping in just a moment, but before we do, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. So just know that you can participate. You can feel free to turn your cameras on. Many of you are already doing that. I love it. And no worries about being Instagram ready. Just show up as your authentic self today. This is a safe space. All's welcome. You're going to see me do this quite a few times to make sure my dog isn't chewing on the couch. So I apologize for that, but he's into it today, little one. So know that we are recording this and you'll get a follow-up rewatch link with also with some awesome resources that our speaker is going to help provide as well. So check that out in the email. And you can follow the Power to Fly chat and learns, and know that you can write your questions here. If you have any questions that come up while we're chatting today, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I or the speaker will touch on them. And also know that if you can do chat with us in a couple of different ways. You can ask your questions a couple different ways. You can ask them in the group chat there where everybody can see them. So this is a shared space. Please be mindful that we'd like to use language that's positive and supportive of each other, and know that everyone else can see what you're writing. And if you'd like to ask a question privately or anonymously, you can go over to the chat section, select my name, Hunter C. at Power to Fly, and then you can send that question directly to me, and I will happily ask that question on your behalf anonymously. And know that, what else? Well, if there's any other concerns that come up, you can also message me, or there is a facilitator in the back. You can see it says Power to Fly Chat and Learn. That is a real human named Erica, not a robot. And she is here to help support. So if anything comes up and you would prefer to check in with her, you can do that. Okay, so you can follow us on all the things at Power to Fly, hashtag Power to Fly. Feel free to share what you get out of this, and you can also find other chats. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome Jenna here. Jenna is a certified leadership and mindset coach who specializes in supporting sustainable leadership by teaching tools to prevent burnout. Now, she coaches leaders to recognize limiting beliefs and prioritize, their own health and well-being so they can be more present and effective leaders and humans. Oh, something that sounds like all of us can benefit from, whether we're leaders or followers. It's all good, you know, we could just be better humans. So please give Jenna a round of applause, and welcome, Jenna. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And you bring up a really good point, because I would also say that we are all leaders. Some of us are just the leaders of our lives. You know, we're the CEO of our own life. So everybody is bunched into this.
I love that. Thank you for that. And I accept it. I accept that information and I absorb it. And I love it. CEO of my own life. I love that. Thank you. So we're going to jump in. So these are the main takeaways that we're going to be focusing on. So feel free to hone your questions as they are coming up for you. These are the main topics. And again, you can write that in the chat at any point. I like to copy and paste them on the side. So I am trying to keep track of all of your awesome questions that come in. So the topics are understand and practice how to identify the need for boundaries. Oh, Jenna, where were you in my 20s? Build awareness around the importance of uninterrupted focus and presence, and learn how to work smarter with communication boundaries. And being the CFOs and the CEOs of our own lives, I think this can translate into so many things. So, Jenna, so what I have here is I have a list of pre-submitted questions that a lot of folks that are on the call wrote in advance. So folks know that your questions have been pulled into a doc. They are now anonymous. I don't know who wrote them. So thank you in advance to all of you that are here or watching the replay that wrote these questions. They're awesome. And so I'm going to go down this list and kind of pick them as we go along. And again, if anything comes up for you, drop it in the chat and we will we'd love to hear from you and keep the conversation, popcorn style as well. So Jenna, is there anything you'd like to share before we jump into questions? I read a very, a little bit about your bio there. Anything you'd like to share about your personal career journey, why this topic is important and relevant to you and in these times right now?
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you, Hunter, for teeing that up. So I am a coach. I mostly work with leaders within organizations, but I also do individual coaching because, as we're talking about, this applies to everyone, right? And I started my career in mental health, and then worked in the corporate world for about a decade before marrying the two in corporate coaching, which I found to be a beautiful marriage of those two interests. So a lot of my coaching comes from having been in the shoes of a leader and feeling like, in middle management, you're always answering above and below, and trying to make everyone happy. And oftentimes we can put ourselves on the back burner. I know that that's something that I was constantly doing, sort of trying to be a martyr for taking care of my people, taking care of the business. But it leads to burnout, and it leads to us not being as present and effective human beings. And that's why I always mention that, is because we're one human being, even if we compartmentalize work and our personal lives. And so we only have so much energy to give. And it's really important that we are managing that energy well, and really, putting ourselves first so that we can pour from a full cup, not an empty cup. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I love that so much. It's like, as I'm drinking my warm tea right now, like, that metaphor feels right at home right now. It's very nice. And I also just love the hearing more about your background and use the term, the marriage of like mental health and like corporate health. That's so lovely that you came from that background and that you're bringing mental health to a corporate space. And you've been doing this for a minute now, and now it's quite a topical conversation, I feel like. So
yeah, it's definitely been, obviously it's much more top of mind for corporations now. I mean, this has always been something that corporations were talking about. I think the investment now is a little bit more front and center, which I love it, right? I'm all for it, and as long as companies are doing something, and they're doing something genuinely, right? Not performatively to, make sure that they're just checking a box, but really investing energy in changing the culture of how we work. And I think that's, the audacious goal that I have is to get into these organizations and really change the culture of how we work, from that middle management tier. So that those folks can manage up these strategies and of course manage down. But it's got to start somewhere, and kind of giving people permission to work differently, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. I want to put that on my board above my computer. It's like audacious goals for the year. I love that. As the CEO of my life, what is the audacious goal today? I love that. So can we, let's jump in we have this great question about uninterrupted focus time. So what is the importance of uninterrupted focus time and presence, and what are ways to build awareness around this?
Yeah, so actually that's on the next slide here, and we can always come back to this, but there's some really great, sad, beautiful, ugly data out there about interruptions and distractions, right? And so the importance of it is all in the data. I mean, it's mind blowing. And managers are actually, it says 67% more likely than individual contributors to strongly agree that they get a lot of interruptions at work. And a lot of my work with managers is looking at their day to day and figuring out like where those interruptions are coming from, and identifying what's an emergency and what's not. I always talk to people about fires versus embers, right? And, they're like, there's always a fire. I'm like, well, it's not really a fire. It's more like an ember. So let's, kind of redefine how we're thinking about these interruptions. But after each interruption, it takes over 23 minutes to refocus, which is just wild. I like to think that that's not true, but there's a lot of studies out there, and they all bring it up. So
That's
23
stopping
minutes
me
to
dead in my, I'm
refocus.
sorry to cut you off. That is stopping me dead in my tracks because I can see how that's real. And I just think
Yeah,
about all of the wasted time then.
absolutely, absolutely. And also, I mean, hopefully I do talk to some people who are like, oh, I'm great at multitasking. I work better when I multitask. And I just want to kind of make the statement that's probably not true. That multitasking is not a better way to work. It doesn't allow us to get more done, and it actually drops our IQ 10 points, right, when we're trying to do two different things. So there's benefits to staying on one task. And also attention distraction leads to higher stress, bad mood, and lower productivity. So the problem isn't just that we are wasting time, right? Those 23 minutes that we are trying to get refocused, but we're actually also sacrificing our best thinking. So, and I think there's another stat out there about you spend an average of 40 seconds on each computer screen, right? So we're constantly toggling back and forth between different tabs. And I'll talk about that a little bit later with email, but we're constantly trying to do too much, ultimately. And less is more, I would say, in a lot of regards, right? Focusing on one thing, constraining to one thing, finishing that one thing, and then moving on. There's so much value and momentum that's built, and even self-confidence when we finish a task and move on versus hopping around, answering this chat, answering this email, getting back to what we were working on. It's just where a lot of our time is going.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. A friend of mine has a phrase. He talks about it in work. He talks about it in dynamics and relationships, which is complete and continue.
Yeah.
And it's so simple, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm going to do this thing that's in front of me, or this relationship, or whatever it is, and this task, this spreadsheet, this Zoom call, this message, and then continue to the next one. And I love your suggestion there, just taking it one step at a time. And that has also stopped me in my tracks that we lose 10 IQ points when we're multitasking.
I know, it's so sad, but the point of this really is like, to nudge everyone to set aside focus time.
Yes.
When I start work with clients, like, they don't have that, right? They have meetings throughout their entire day. They feel like they don't own their time, and the time they do have, they need to give to their people. And it's kind of like, no, I mean, I know that the company and we and our people benefit from us taking a step back and doing really good work where we're focused. And it takes a lot of commitment, right? And you said, it all seems so easy, but it's not in this day and age, right? We're in a day and age where we are immediate with our responses, where we feel like we have to be. We feel, I think there, somebody mentioned, like, looking like we're lazy, right? If in the questions, if we don't get back to people immediately. And it's kind of like we have to decide to break away from that, which is tough because everybody's immediately responding. Email is now basically chat, the way that it functions. And so it really is, it takes a lot of effort. It sounds easy, but it's not easy at all.
No, and we'll get more into what I'm inferring from what you're talking about. We're gonna be talking more about boundaries soon as well, because there's this underlying pressure. Oh, I have to do it right now. It's like, oh, actually, healthy boundaries. This is gonna be good, and we'll get more into that. I also just want to highlight, if there's any songwriters out there, you said something very earlier on to tee into this. Beautiful, sad, ugly data sounds like a great country song. That's just me. It could be anything. Maybe it's a rap. I don't know. But I'm teeing it up. I'm not a songwriter. Please, someone to write that song.
Love it.
Okay, so yeah, so jumping into, we're going to talk about boundaries a bit, and you were just talking about emails there. So one of our questions was, what are communication boundaries, and what are ways to work smarter with them?
Yeah. So if you don't mind popping back to that beautiful quote
Oh, sure.
from Brene. Yeah, we all know and love Brene, right? But I love this quote because it talks about boundaries as this need for us to maintain, to be compassionate humans, right? And it keeps us out of resentment. So, to tee up the conversation of boundaries, I think it's really important to understand what boundaries are, right? And for the sake of this conversation, I'm talking about digital boundaries in how we communicate with our teams, mostly at work. But of course, there's digital boundaries in social media, there's digital boundaries in our personal life, there's boundaries in general. But boundaries are how we act in a certain situation. So it's not necessarily wanting to change other people, but it's staying committed to the consequences that we enact from the rules that we make for ourselves. So a really good example of this that's good for this conversation is chat, right? Everybody I work with has Slack or GChat or something, right? And there's constantly messages coming in. And oftentimes people will multitask, right? They'll be in meetings and they'll answer chats while they're in this meeting. And a boundary would be something like, when I'm in this meeting, I don't look at any of my other communication tools. I'm not answering emails, I'm not answering chat, right? So it's not necessarily that if somebody chats you, they're disrespecting your boundaries, or that they are disrespecting you. I hear that a lot, is people don't respect my boundaries, right? But boundaries aren't about changing what other people do. It's simply saying that if you chat me while I'm in this meeting, I'm not going to respond. The consequence is that you don't get a response until 2 p.m., right? That's my boundary. And if people chat me, that's perfectly fine, right? I mean, I can make a request that they don't. But if they do, it's up to me to maintain that consequence of the boundary. So that's one really good example of a boundary that people have. Another really good one is with emails, not checking email after work hours or before work hours, right? So when you receive that email at 4 a.m., it's not that you have to respond. That person will know, if you've kind of set the boundary and made it clear, that if I receive an email after work hours, I'm not going to check it until work hours begin, and that's when you'll get a response. The reality is that other people, we all have different lives going on, right? We all have different things that we are navigating in our life. And it may be that at 4 a.m., that person, that's the best time for them to email you. And it doesn't have to mean that you're lazy for not emailing back. It doesn't have to mean that they expect that from you. Even if they do expect that from you, it doesn't have to mean that for you. You can just maintain that boundary, right? You can make that decision for yourself. But identifying the need for boundaries, two really good tools in order to do that. And I'll be sending, again, a resource that kind of outlines these things, a resentment journal, right? We all talk about gratitude journals, but keeping a resentment journal, this is a fellow burnout coach. I heard this from this individual and just loved it, right? Moments that we are feeling really tense and resentful, right? Like when we get that email at 4 a.m. Those are a good indicator of where we need boundaries, right? Just as Brene says in this quote, having boundaries keeps us out of resentment. So resentment as an emotion is a really good indicator of where we need to put a boundary. I know there's a lot of people out there that are probably frustrated with things about their work, about the workload, maybe about people you work with, and all of those things are really powerful messages of where we might need to set in boundaries, right? So turning that resentment around and turning it into a tool rather than this something that just eats at you and eats at you. Um, Same thing with the second tool, which is just to listen to your body. So awareness around moments that you're feeling especially tense or frustrated, it means there's an opportunity to create some change, which, as we know, boundaries are a really good way to do that. Also, because boundaries, again, are not saying everybody else needs to change. They're just saying that I'm going to take care of myself and put myself first. And this is how I'm going to move through the workday, prioritizing myself.
So much good stuff in there. You got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, right? And it's not, I think there's a reframing that a lot of us are going through right now of that it's not a selfish act, actually, if you're doing self-care and boundaries setting, because you're actually helping other people when you're doing it. At least I can speak from my own experience, where if I'm creating healthy boundaries, then I show up less resentful, hopefully not resentful, and happy to communicate when we're communicating, and I'm a better teammate, employee, friend, partner, whatever it is. These boundaries actually are maybe unpleasant in the initial setting of them for someone else, but in the long term, they actually are a much healthier, more cohesive relationship.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know a big thing that comes up for people is saying no, right? How do I say no? Or how do I say no, kind of more politely or whatever it might be. And saying no is actually a gift that you give people because of just exactly what you said, Hunter. It's like, if I say yes and I do this work project and I'm tired, exhausted, I'm gonna, probably not do a great job. I'm gonna be worn out and resentful towards you and the company, and maybe be looking for other things. And again, it's gonna impact my work, it's gonna impact me and impact the company at large. So it's almost like reframing that of saying no is a gift, because you're not showing up as your best self in the project anyway when you don't have the bandwidth or when you just don't want to do it, right?
Totally. And I think as someone that comes from mental health, you'll appreciate this. My first therapist told me when I was learning about boundaries, she said, the creation of boundaries is a loving act.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love talking about everything we do coming from a place of unconditional love. It's an ideal, right? It's like, I tell my clients that, like, I talk about this all the time and I struggle with it, right? But at least to have that ideal where we're making these decisions and setting these boundaries and saying no, not from a place of anything but love, right? For ourselves first. That's number one, which we all struggle with sometimes, but then also for love for the other person, right? Because you don't want to resent them, right? That's not great for them.
Right.
And oftentimes it leads to like complaining to coworkers, talking behind people's back. There's just a lot of kind of negative stuff that comes from saying yes to things or doing things that we ultimately don't want to do. So having the boundaries, saying no, those things actually benefit everybody.
Yeah. I love too when you were using the examples of email and chat about, maybe someone's ideal time to respond to it is 4 a.m. And then there might be a pressure if you're just checking your phone for the time or whatever, and then you see this email to respond. Especially now in these days when we're working remotely, like Power to Fly, we're an entirely global company that is entirely remote now. So someone else's 4 a.m. or my 4 a.m. is someone else's like morning, after. So I think also when you were talking about, not taking someone sending that email isn't crossing my boundary. Me responding would be, and that's on me, right? And so it's inviting this compassion to other people's scenarios as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk to people, I think this is important too. So I have clients who will come to me and they'll say, so I get off work at 6 and then I take care of the kids. I fix dinner, I put the kids down, and then I get on my email and I check it. And is that bad? Like, are you mad at me? Right? Like, my clients always think that I'm going to get mad at them for things, which I'm like, no, not at all. This is a no judgment zone. But, what I always say is, like, if that's working for you, go for it, right? Like, do that, If it's not working for you, be honest with yourself, right? And make sure that you are making changes and setting appropriate boundaries for yourself. And again, being honest with yourself. If something's working and something feels good, and it's you getting up at 4 a.m. and doing emails before everybody gets into the office, I have no problem with it. It's when we're not honest with ourselves and we're actually like breeding a lot of resentment and we're not getting enough sleep and we're working long hours and feeling burnt out, right? If that's leading to burnout, and if it's leading to resentment, and if it's leading to us snapping at our loved ones and our kids, then something needs to change, right? It's probably, not good to be logging in at 8 or 4 a.m., right? So I think part of it is this kind of being honest with ourselves around whether what we're doing is working.
Yeah. Something for me also that I've learned about these boundaries with emails is I'm a big fan of the send later feature. And it's
love it.
Right? Mm-hmm. Isn't the best, depending on whatever app you use for your email, just about all of them have it now. And you can write your email and then send it at a certain time. And again, I work in a company where I'm very grateful to work in a company where everyone's in a different time zone. So me sending at 8 a.m. doesn't really mean much, maybe necessarily, but also for me, it's upholding my boundary of like, my emails don't go out until the workday starts, and that's just, everybody's different and there's no one right way to do it. But for me, that's like how I like to present, to be like, this is when emails are going out so they can come in too,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would love to actually hop like 2 slides maybe and dig into emails, because there's another ugly, beautiful, wonderful,
country
I
song.
Forget now the word, the country song stat that I want to share.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So the average person, the stat isn't on here, but you'll all get this in the PDF. The average person checks email 74 times a day.
Ouch.
with some people on the high end of the spectrum checking it 435 times a day.
Oh my gosh.
So when we think about the stat around the interruption and it taking 23 minutes to get back to focus in on what we were doing, and this is realistic, right? The 74 and even the 435, right? Because we have it on our phones. When we're bored, we just click the email. We also have the tab open, right? All of my tab people out there who have a million tabs open at any given time. And when the number pops up, we go to our email, right? And we check it. And maybe we don't do anything with that email, but we look at it, right? So this is interruption central. And one tip that I have for email is that you schedule specific times to check your email. It will feel wrong. It will feel like you are ignoring everybody, but only for a little bit. You will also feel liberated, I promise. So a good thing that you can do, and I tell people this too, you can check it every hour on the hour, right? That means you're checking it 8 times a day instead of 74 times a day, right? If you're working 8 hours. But you taking control over when you're checking it versus you getting disrupted in the, randomly on the task at hand because somebody else, sent an email. It just gives you the power back, right? It's like, I choose when I check my email, not necessarily somebody sending it gets to dictate that. And really that's a decision, right? email was never meant to be like chat and immediate. So it might be communicating with your team, this new fun, cool thing that you're doing. I actually recommend communicating all these things when you're doing them, partly to get buy-in that other people do it too. That's how we change the culture. But also to let them know, there's not going to be an immediate response. Also, if you're in a meeting for an hour, you wouldn't be able to respond to the email anyway. So checking email only at specific times each day. Same thing with chat and Slack. And I would say turning off notifications when you are working on something, right? When you're dedicating focus time to a project, and being really honest about what's a fire or emergency. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but the language that we use is just going down a rabbit hole, right? Where everything's a fire. And most of the people I work with are not in the medical field, right? Where it's actually not an emergency. But we all like to think our stuff is emergencies. And so really for yourself, delineating what is something that is worth pulling your attention and what is not, and making sure that you're taking care of yourself in that way. The third thing here, focus time, we've talked about it a few times, but this is setting up that uninterrupted block of time where you turn off your notifications, you silence your phone. This can be 1 hour. I recommend to my clients 2 hours every day, which probably sounds just impossible when I say it right here to everyone, but it's what I recommend. But it can be an hour, right? It can be 30 minutes. I think if you don't have any uninterrupted time during your week, even just 30 minutes, building that in and building off of it, you're going to get a lot more done. And then commit to yourself. So commitments to yourself, the CEO analogy comes up again. So treat yourself like the CEO of your life, not rescheduling commitments to yourself unless it's an emergency. I always tell people, pretend that you're meeting with the CEO because you're the CEO, right? And you would not cancel that meeting unless there was blood involved, right? Unless it was a true emergency. Treat yourself with that same level of respect and keep those things, right? Keep that thing. If you plan to walk, right? Or if you planned to work on this project, if you plan to do your taxes, I don't know. Keep those commitments like you're the CEO. And that's always a really good analogy. If you don't have a CEO or you that's not working for you, I say treat yourself like a celebrity, right? It's like your favorite celebrity that you just like would not pass up meeting for lunch or meeting for whatever. Any time you have with yourself is time with that celebrity.
I love that. Something over the years that I've adopted for myself is I'm a very visual person. So color coordinating things help me, especially in the digital world, because I feel like I can be very scatterbrained with all of the different communications, with all the different commitments. I can't remember all of these things. It's impossible for me. So for me, I have so many different color calendars, but this way I can just look at my month and be like, oh, I don't have enough social time planned because there's not enough yellow on the calendar. It's just like a quick glance. And I'm like, oh, wow, I have a lot of meetings. I have like that many meetings with Powered Fly this week. Okay, cool. Like whatever it is.
Yeah.
Then I can fill in different colors, to be like, oh, I need some more walks or some more me time. Or, oh, I actually am not working as many hours as I would like, or whatever it is,
Yeah. You bring up a really great point about scheduling, I would say, and planning. So the reality is if it's not planned and on our calendar, it's not going to get done. This is something that I tried to fight for a long time. My clients try to fight. My husband tries to fight. But, if it's not on there and we're waiting to feel like doing something, we're just never going to do it, even if it's something fun like going for a walk, right? Or reading a book. And so there's such value. And I saw one of the questions that came in early was about, like block scheduling. Scheduling things, especially free time on our calendars, is so important. I always tell my clients, schedule free time first, because the work is never going to be done.
Mm.
So you can just filter in the work around the stuff that aligns with your values and priorities, right? Family and wellness and social hours. So making sure that those things are getting scheduled, because if not, you're going to get to the end of the week and you're going to say, I'm exhausted. I did nothing for myself, right? I was in front of my computer 12 hours a day and never even took a break for lunch, right? So scheduling those things is so important, and we try and resist it, right? We're like, no, because I'll lose my freedom and I don't like being tied down by a schedule. And the reality is that we actually, are able to do more of the stuff we love, like live a more conscious and deliberate life, when we do schedule in those things that are most important to us. And then the other thing is actually doing the things once we schedule them, which is the commitment to ourselves.
Yeah.
But knowing that there's always going to be resistance, right? There's nothing wrong with us that when we get to that thing in our schedule, we don't want to do it. Like, we're humans. If anyone's ever read the book, The War of Art, it's all about resistance, and I love it. But there's nothing wrong with us. It doesn't mean anything about us that we don't want to do the thing. It's just that we're humans and we never want to do the thing when it's scheduled, right? But the scheduling is so important. And there was also this question tied into that about the Pomodoro technique. And I'm supportive of it, right? I'm supportive of anything that helps us focus, whatever works for you. It doesn't work for everyone, but if that works for you, that's great. And actually, one of the Power to Flies that I recently attended, we talked about ultradian rhythms. And so I went on, a little research hunt, just so enamored by this new idea that I'd never heard of. But I recommend looking into it. But essentially what ultradian rhythms are, it says that working 90-minute blocks or 2-hour blocks and then taking a 20-minute break, but a 20-minute brain break. So not necessarily reading or doing other things that get your brain going, like truly kind of like sitting in the corner and not using your brain, right? So having these chunks of time where we're focused and where we're getting after it, but not having the entire day be that, because our brain needs a break. It needs to recharge. And that's better long-term for us and for the work we're doing, right? We think we're being productive when we're working 12 hours in a row, but really our work is starting to, the work is just not as high quality.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can feel, especially looking at the screen for a long time, I'm like, my eyes are literally crossing right now, trying to focus on this. And it's just going, whoop, where did I just go?
Yeah. And your body is definitely sending you a message there.
Yeah.
What I would say is it's nice to not get to that point, and to then probably kind of take the break before our eyes start to get cross-eyed. And because that's what's happening with burnout, right? It's like we sort of, get to a point where there's now no turning back, almost like we're in burnout, and then it's too late, right? It's a slow build. But if we're kind of medically in burnout, then it's really hard to get ourselves out of that physically, mentally, emotionally. So it's sort of like doing these things before the eyes start to cross, or before it's a red flag, and taking care of your body to give it what it needs.
Yeah. I think it's so important. Like, there's I love what you're saying about listening to our bodies and taking it as cues. And earlier, it's related to where the resentments are building, and that can be an invitation to a boundary. So I love that it's like this data mining we can do with ourselves, right? Of finding all this stuff of, oh, I'm getting angry or burn out. And as opposed to getting resentful, I can use it as an invitation to create a boundary, maybe have a productive conversation with someone, take a break, go on a walk. I think I love too the delegated, the 20 minutes out, 90 minutes in, 20 minutes out, because it's easy to go, oh, I'm going to take 20 minutes and then doom scroll. That'll be good for me. No.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Your brain needs that break.
Yeah, absolutely. So friends, we have about 20 minutes left. So feel free to keep your questions coming in. Jen has been doing a beautiful job of weaving them through some of our conversation here. So feel free.
That was the only one, and then I got overwhelmed. So
well, at least we're calling it out. We see it. We had a moment of overwhelm. I'm here to support you. I was having my own moment. It's like, for some reason, I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen. So, whoops. So that was going on for me quietly in the background.
So now we're back.
We have some great questions coming in. So, Courtney asked earlier, how do you refocus yourself more effectively, especially on days when you're struggling the most? One topic we just did with that 20-minute break. Are there other ways that you would suggest for refocusing?
Yeah. So the unfair response is to not get distracted so that we don't have to refocus, right? That's in a perfect world. But we're all going to get distracted because we're all humans and we all have phones and we all have people in our lives that distract us. So when that does happen, I think, kind of getting back to the boundary, right, of turning off notifications when you are trying to refocus, making a commitment to say, okay, I'm not going to be distracted again, right? Maybe I tell the people living with me to give me an hour. Maybe I tell my team, that I'm not going to be able to respond for an hour, but kind of resetting, and so that we're not having multiple 23 minutes of refocusing, rather just, nipping it in the bud that one time. I would also say when the question says on days you struggle the most, I love this because we all have those days where we're just in a funk, right? Like, we're all human. We've all had it. You all know what I'm talking about. What helps for me is truly and I talk to my clients about a scheduling kind of concept called Monday Hour One, where I spend an hour on Monday before my week starts, planning out my entire week, all the things I want to get done, all my tasks, and I schedule them in my calendar, right? And schedule my free time first, right? So when I'm having a bad day or I'm struggling, I'm having a bad week, I don't have to make those decisions on what to work on, right? It's like I already made those decisions on Monday. And I tell my husband all the time, I'm like, Monday Hour One saved me this week because we get into the week, it's hectic. There's all these things going on. There's things distracting us. But if we plan it out in advance, what we're going to be doing at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, when the time comes, we don't even have to worry our brains or make a decision. We just do the thing that was scheduled. And so days where I'm struggling, I lean into that scheduling. Because then I'm not depending on my feeling of how motivated I feel or how much I want to do something. I just do the thing that on Monday I said would be best for me at that moment.
I love that. And as a previous schedule denier, I am the opposite now. I'm completely, as you've heard, my color coded version. I can really speak to that. It really does work as someone who used to just be like, I don't know what even tomorrow holds. I'm a freelancer, like that was like I said, where were you in my 20s? That's what it was like. And now it's like, oh, when I schedule my free time or when I look at my work, I do show up, or just like commitments that I want to make, it really does. And, if something changes, that's okay, or if I don't want to go and I realize, oh, actually what would be better for me right now is a nap, or whatever it is, it's okay to be flexible. But like you said, if it's not on the schedule, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Everyone loves to hate the schedules. They really do. And the planning. And that's okay. I mean, I'm the same way. It's like I would rather not spend extra time just scheduling and planning. But when you see the value of it, like same thing with meal planning. I mean, that's kind of a silly one, but it's like there's so much mental drama around meals. every day. We have to feed ourselves, and people who don't like cooking or who have kids are like, I'm in the kitchen all day. And it's like, well, let's just meal plan on Sunday and freeze some stuff and prepare it. And then during the week, when we're all stressed out and everybody's vying for our attention, we just pop it in the oven or pop it in the microwave, and we don't even have to think about it. So it's just kind of being kind to ourselves through planning, which takes additional time and effort, but it's worth it.
Oh, it's so worth it. I know you say it's silly, but if we're hungry, like if I'm hungry, I am the first person to be unfocused. And I can, if you're probably familiar with HALT, right? Am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired?
Yeah.
If
Absolutely.
I'm not doing so well, I'm usually 3 of those 4, and it's usually hungry and tired.
Right. And it stinks to get to that point, right? So it's
Yeah.
sort of like, let's not get there.
Yeah, let's not get there. Let's take care of our future selves,
Yeah.
especially too. And I do find myself when I do those preps or planning, I go, thank you, past me, for taking care of, like, I actually thank myself because I didn't used to do that, and it feels really good when something I've done is helping myself succeed. It feels great.
Totally. There's momentum that's built and self-trust, which is great. And I would say too, I mean, I know that in the US, at least, and in a lot of places, this sort of kind of burnout culture and work. And, there being sort of this stamp of pride on working overtime. I really do think that that's shifting. I think that for the most part, we really do respect leaders more when they have boundaries, when they make time for their families, when they go on vacation, right? For the most part, people are looking up to those folks and with admiration and saying, wow, they're able to balance everything, right? They're a great leader. They take care of themselves. Like, I want to be more like that. So it's really like we can feel proud of ourselves for that balance that we create in our lives. And I always talk about role modeling wellness. Like, I love when people are role modeling wellness, and your teams will like it too, right? And I think that the culture, at least, is shifting from a mentality standpoint. Our actions aren't necessarily shifting as quickly, but at least from sort of this organic, who we look up to and who we admire, it's the people who are able to balance everything.
Yeah, I love role modeling wellness. That is beautiful. So I had a direct message here that I'm going to ask on this person's behalf. It's a great question. What are your tips for walk-ins? People like my staff, peers, boss, clients walk into my office all the time and sit down. I'm seeing some nodding heads in the crowd. Just like that, I have a cubicle as a middle manager, not an office. What do I do with with all these walk-ins and my stripes around this?
Yeah. So a couple of things I would say, talking to everybody about this boundary with walk-ins, right? I think with that comes this mindset shift of, it doesn't mean that I'm not a great manager, a supportive manager, when I have this boundary around not kind of giving into walk-ins, right? So that's something. I would also say that scheduling time in your schedule for walk-ins, right? So somebody comes and they walk up to your desk at 10 a.m. You can say, hey, I'm busy right now, but come back at 2. And 2 is your walk-in time, right? You set aside, we talk about, like, especially as managers, that people sort of, we can't plan for people needing things, right? But what we can plan for is, we can make sure that we have time in our schedule to accommodate those things, knowing that they happen every day, right? These walk-ups and walk-ins. And so the boundary is not necessarily that I'm not going to help you solve that problem, but I'm not going to help you at 10 a.m. when I'm working on something else. I'm going to help you at 2. And you don't even necessarily have to say, I'm working on something, like, and this is a boundary. What you can say is, hey, I can't talk right now, but can you come back at 2, or let's schedule something at 2. So it's sort of planning for those pop-ins, the random pop-ins that aren't actually as random as they seem, and building that time into our schedule so that we can be there for, the social aspect or to help solve problems, but we do it on our time instead of letting our teams or coworkers kind of all take our time. The other, maybe not as nice suggestions that I have is like noise canceling headphones are amazing, right? Putting them on sends a message where you're like, hey, I'm focused on something. I canceled out the noise around me, right? For a reason. So using tools like that, and I know it's harder in a cubicle, but even having a sign that says like busy or in a meeting, right? If you were actually in a meeting, you would say exactly that. You'd be like, I'm busy, can't talk right now, come back at a different time. So you just have to keep that kind of response and boundary even when a meeting with somebody else isn't happening, right? When it's a meeting with you, the CEO.
Yeah, I did. So I work from home, obviously, and my partner sometimes does, and we used to work in the same room. We don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I started putting it, I was like, babe, office hours, like I can't talk right now. And I was experiencing that 23-minute thing, or the 26, however many minutes it was, unknowingly. And I started using the noise canceling headphones, and he started to get the cue. But like weeks later, I mentioned, I was like, man, I love these things. He's like, I don't like them.
Yeah. And you know what? People aren't going to like everything that you do, right? And that's about, mindset shifts around people pleasing. It's like, no matter what you do, not everyone's going to be happy. So it's so much more meaningful and productive to just do what you need rather than trying to shape shift to please everyone, right? So, and if you are taking care of yourself, you are giving people more of what they need.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the people pleasing thing. That is, like you said, that's not a nice one, but it's so important for me, like developing, because that is also the people pleasing. Guess what it's tied to? Resentments. It happens so quickly. Yeah.
Totally. And there was a question and I'm sorry to jump ahead, but
Please.
this was
We all have less than 10 minutes.
on topic.
So feel free.
Yeah, because Catherine says, if you come to your desk and people are waiting for you. So I think when I was managing and in the office, which feels like so long ago, people would come up to my desk and I would be I'm not a very pleasant person. I didn't like when people came up to my desk, not even from a distraction or whatever standpoint. It was just that I felt kind of caught off guard, and then I felt defensive, right? So, okay, listen to our bodies. This is resentment. This, let's create something, right? So what I did was I talked to my team about exactly how I was feeling. I was like, I do not function well when you approach me at my desk. I'm just not ready for it. I'm not my best self. I get defensive. I know these are things I need to go to my therapist about, but this is the reality of what's happening. And I don't want to take it out on you. So I would ask that people don't, come up to my desk, right? So same thing I would say with when colleagues are already waiting for you, you can communicate that. You can communicate and say, if it's your team, like you can set a team boundary or a team rule that, hey, like if I'm not at my desk and I come back to my desk, like I would prefer that we set up a different time. Or if I'm not at my desk, please just chat me and I'll get back to it, or email me and I'll get back to you when I do have time. You can always set up some communication tools like that. I think communicating it is really important. Now, certainly, like if somebody's at your desk and like, okay, you just came from a meeting and you want to talk to someone and you like that. And again, if it's working for you, great. But if it's adding stress and tension and resentment, I think creating a system where people know that that's not the best way to communicate with you or to get your attention is important. And yes, everyone seems to have an emergency. And that's why it's so important for you to decide what actually is an emergency, because everybody's got an emergency.
Mhm.
and you have to decide for yourself, what you're going to deem an emergency. I would say that it's when blood is involved. So you can set that boundary with your team, right? It's not an emergency unless blood is involved. Um, I think, a good example, or not necessarily example, but one of my clients, what they did, they were in real estate, right? And so their clients always reach out with emergencies, right? And she was like, they're not emergencies. So what she did was she changed her phone where calls don't go through, and instead people get a voice message, and the voice message says, it's, November 16th. I'll be checking my messages at 3 p.m. before I leave for the day. And I'll get back to you then. Right. And I thought this was very brave, right? Because real estate agents are like, oh, customer service, I need to get to people, time is money. But what she found was, for the most part, people either solved their own problem,
Mm.
um, and or she got back to them, and they really appreciated the kind of honesty of, and the commitment to, I'm going to reach out to you at 3 p.m. Right. So they liked having that sort of awareness around her schedule. So it all kind of relates to what I talked about earlier, of just owning our time and picking a time that we get back to people. But I just love that, because oftentimes we think in real estate, no, you're at the will of the client, but you actually don't have to be.
I love that. I do think that's a brave thing to do. And I also love
Mhm.
that it's nice to hear that people received it. And because on the other side of it, then people were able to schedule around that, like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm going to get a call back around 3:30.
Exactly. And I find that with emails too a lot. Like, if you actually don't respond to emails immediately, or don't respond to chats immediately, people solve their own problems. And that's really, empowering, right? For people to be able to solve their own problems. Oftentimes they're reaching out, not because of being lazy, but they're reaching out because there's some confidence, maybe, issues, or they want a second look, and it's really powerful, like, training to be able to give your people that moment of empowerment for them to solve their own problems.
I love it. So we are pretty much about time here. Jenna, is there anything you'd like to touch on before we wrap up? I see you just dropped in your helpful PDF there. I'm going to direct everyone to the chat. This is going to also be in the follow-up link. But Jenna, can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so that's everything that we just talked about. I was using that as notes for myself for what I was sharing.
Great.
So everything that I said based on the slides is going to be in that digital boundaries takeaways. And also, there's my contact information on there as well. Feel free to communicate with me about this. If you do have, personal questions or concerns, or even if you want to figure out a way to kind of bring this message to your company. So many companies are not kind of speaking the same language around this type of permission. And it can feel tough when you're the only one who's creating these boundaries.
Mm.
And so I would say, share as much as possible with your people, because strength in numbers, and let me know how I can help, because I think it's just one piece of the pie. Like, the burnout and changing the way we work is so much bigger. But I think it's definitely an important piece of the pie that we have more control over than we think.
Well, on that note, here where I am, it's 2 o'clock. Sounds like pie is for lunch, because that sounds delicious. I'm getting hungry. And thank you so much, Jenna, for making the time today. We're getting so much love in the chat box. Thank you
Yeah.
all for showing up, for being present, for bringing your authentic selves, your questions, your vulnerability. I just really appreciate all of y'all on the call. And Jenna, thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope we get to do this again.
Oh, we will. I'm sure of
Okay, great. All
it.
right, friends. We'll see you